Israel says 4 hostages are back in its custody after being released by Palestinian militant group Hamas. It's the second such release under a ceasefire agreement that stopped the fighting in Gaza last weekend. Hamas brought the 4 women soldiers onto a stage in Gaza City where they were handed over to the Red Cross. They were then taken to Israel. The Palestinian militant group and allied groups captured some 250 hostages during the October 2023 terror attacks that began the war. Dozens of Palestinian prisoners are also set to be released from Israeli jails under the terms of the 6-week truce. Let's bring in our correspondent Tanya Kramer, who is following the story for us from Jerusalem. Tanya, the hostages, we understand, are now in IDF custody and are on their way to reunite with their families. What more do you know?
Well, absolutely. We just got a confirmation from the Israeli military that they were handed over from the International Red Cross to the special forces, and that they have now crossed back into Israeli territory. So they're now officially back in Israel. We also heard a statement by the Prime Minister's office saying the government embraces them coming back home. And now what is going to happen there is they will be reunited now with their parents. Last Sunday we had the mothers of the 3 hostages that were released last Sunday waiting for them there. Now this time we have the mothers and the fathers, so the parents, both of them waiting now for those 4 female hostages. They were all soldiers deployed around the Gaza Strip on October 7, 2023, when they were taken captive during the terror attacks at that time and taken to Gaza. Now people have been waiting for this moment, certainly for over 15 months now. They have been in captivity for 477 days. And just shortly in the past hour or so, as you said, they were handed over by Hamas there in Gaza City, where we've seen a very organized scene there with a contingent of militants and fighters from Hamas and also the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, also bystanders watching the scene as those 4 hostages, female soldiers, then were taken to a stage and then handed over to the International Red Cross and then driven out, and now they're back in Israeli territory.
As you mentioned, they've been in captivity for more than 15 months. What conditions will the women be in?
Well, we understand the first thing they will undergo is an initial medical checkup now when they arrive. But I mean, we can only, tell you what we saw from far away on these pictures. There were, and I think this was a sign for many. They were coming out of these cars and walking to this stage. They all looked and they could stand on their own 2 feet. There were obviously some concerns. One of them was injured on October 7 when taken captive, but then they were walking back to the car. So that's all we've seen. They seem to be, of course, on their faces you could see relief, but I think it's a bit hard to tell, from very far away from pictures alone what their actual medical condition is. But I think there was a sigh of relief for many in Israel because, they didn't know what conditions there are, but they appear to be in relatively good health.
Of course, this won't be over until all the hostages are released, I imagine, for Israel. And until this ceasefire has definitely held. Give us a sense of the atmosphere in the country at this moment.
Well, absolutely. I mean, this is, what's been talked about here a lot. I mean, there have been, it's sort of a split screen in a way. And on the one hand, there's the happiness. You could see also on so-called Hostage Square there in Tel Aviv, many people there watching the scene, of those hostages now being released. There's happiness and joy about that. On the other hand, there's a lot of concern and anxiety also of those that are staying behind. especially today, there were supposed to be 2 more civilian women that were under the agreement should have been released first before the soldiers should be released, but they were not on the list. Now, this is a very phased-out agreement where we see, every week 3 or 4 hostages being released in exchange for Palestinian detainees that are held in Israeli prisons. Now, so there is this, this concern or this sort of dark cloud hang over whether this agreement will actually go on. So many things could go wrong, and there's also, in the first phase, 33 hostages, and then there's still over 60 that would be then in captivity. So what will happen to them if it doesn't go into the second stage, where there's also talk about a more permanent ceasefire that both sides still have to negotiate, and that's of course not just important for Israelis but also for Palestinians in Gaza.
I suppose what also makes emotions complex is the fact that this war was waged by Israel to retaliate for the October 7th attacks and also to eliminate Hamas. But one could get the impression this was a show of strength by Hamas right there in northern Gaza and at the hands of its military forces releasing those hostages.
Yeah, absolutely, because that has been, a point of conversation here since last week when the first release happened, which was a bit less, staged as it looked today. We saw today really a contingent of Hamas fighters there, as well as other militant factions, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad there, really showing that they're in control of this event, of this release. And I think this is, as you rightly pointed out, very difficult to watch for many Israelis as well, and also because we have heard time and time again from the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, this war is being waged, and one of the war goals is to remove Hamas from power. Now, there are a lot of question marks being raised. I mean, Hamas has certainly been weakened, but, they're saying with these pictures, they're in control of this process, and they're very much in control of what's happening there, at least what we could be seeing right now from these pictures.
Tanya, we should also mention Israel is also expected to release around 200 Palestinian prisoners as well. What more do we know about them?
Yeah, we also have, as part of this agreement, for every released Israeli hostage, there will be a certain number of Palestinians, Palestinian detainees released. And so we're expecting this release also to take place today. Last time it happened really, really late into the night. Somehow Palestinians have said, Israel doesn't want us to basically show these pictures of joy as well, because families there are also waiting now for those Palestinian detainees to be released. We understand some of them are serving life sentences. Others have been under administrative detention. This is a very controversial practice in Israel, where people can be held without charge for many months, sometimes years, in Israeli prisons. Now, they will be released, some of them, as we understand, to the occupied West Bank. Some will be released into Gaza, but some of them might also be released, or deported rather, to third countries, so they will not be reunited with their families. So this process is also taking place, expected to take place later today. And people there are waiting also for their relatives now to come home as well. I have to say, Palestinians in Gaza are also watching this very closely to basically see if the next step of this agreement will be implemented. Mainly, we're expecting hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who want to go home, that were displaced during the war, to the south, and will then be able to go back to northern Gaza.
Okay. Our thanks, as always, to DW's Tanya Kramer there in Jerusalem.